Let me ask you a bit more about the content of your speech. You say that Gordon Brown's stimulus spending and the bank bailouts have worsened the situation in Britain. Are you saying that it would have been better to leave the markets unfettered to sort this out?
Well, I mean, the problem was not only a failure of the banks, there was also a political failure. We should be careful before we go down this road of saying that the whole problem was absence of regulation. The underlying problem was that interest rates were kept too low for too long. That happened in the US, it happened in Britain, it happened in the European Central Bank, it happened in Japan, but that was a political decision, not a market one. The problem of subprime loans, which is, if you like, the gangrene in the little toe that then spread through the whole system and poisoned the whole of the banking body, that was not something that developed because banks took it into their heads. There was legislation both from the Carter era and then from the Clinton era basically telling them to expand home ownership. I mean, as recently as last year, the US Congress was telling Fannie and Freddie to make more cheap loans available. So it's important that we keep a sense of perspective here. It isn't as simple as to say no regulation was a bad thing, more regulation would be a good thing. As for the stimulus and the additional spending, I mean, I don't know how it's been covered in Australia, but certainly in the UK, there has been a rush to almost euphoric instant judgment in the aftermath of the G20 summit, you know, and the phrase you hear repeated again and again on the BBC is that, you know, world leaders have decided to pump $1.1 trillion into the world economy. Well, okay, where do you get that $1.1 trillion from, if not, you know, in the broader sense of the word, from the world economy? It's not new money that's somehow been sucked in from outer space somewhere. In other words, we're taking money out of taxpayers' pockets and dispersing it through these various bureaucracies. And you've just got to ask, is that going to be any more efficient than letting people choose for themselves what they'd have done with it?
Given, though, that governments always have an eye on the politics of these situations and they feel the need to be seen to be doing something, would any government in the world, no matter how conservative, be prepared to take a more passive approach and not be pumping money into the economy, as you put it?
Well, that was exactly the problem. That was exactly the problem. In the current 24-hour media world, the way the electorates are, it is a very difficult thing for a politician to say, I don't think that there's much that can be done about this. You know, I think the most pernicious phrase in politics is, doing nothing is not an option. It's almost never true, by the way. It's almost never true. But it's sort of taken on a momentum of its own. And so it happened in Britain, it happened in the US, it happened in Europe. In the immediate aftermath of these banking collapses, there was a rush towards frenzied activity. And voters initially warmed to it for very understandable reasons. If you've got two people and one of them is saying, I know, I've got the answer, and the other one's going, well, you know, I don't think there's very much we can do, your instinct very naturally is to give the first fellow his chance, you know, to see if he's right. The trouble is that when it turns out that he was wrong, it's too late to do anything about it, because the additional spending and the additional intervention takes on a momentum of its own. And certainly that's what happened in my country. There was a massive splurge of money, a really huge one. It didn't work. But by then, a political leader can't go back to his taxpayers and say, oh, sorry, guys, you know, that didn't really work. I mean, I've blown your money away and it's been... He has to keep doubling, like a gambler in a casino. Oh, it hasn't worked because we haven't done it enough yet, so let's spend more. And if that doesn't work, we'll borrow and spend what we're borrowing. That happened in the UK until we had emptied the Treasury and exhausted our credit and forced this extraordinary thing, which was the Governor of the Bank of England to go... I mean, he's normally a very reclusive character. He very rarely gives interviews. He was actually dragged, blinking like a kind of mole out of his hole, onto television to say publicly, look, we can't afford this anymore. You know, we cannot do another stimulus package. The coffers are completely empty. Now, that frenzied activity of the last 6 months is now going to be a debt that our children and grandchildren are paying off through higher taxes. You know, we have made permanent and deleterious changes to our capacity as a country to recover, all for the sake of showing that something could be done.
The G20's now ended and the nations have promised to spend $1.1 trillion to boost the global economy. What do you think of that?
A trillion here,
a
trillion there, and sooner or later you're talking real money, you know. I mean, the sums are... What's allowed them to get away with it is that the sums are now so astronomical that they are literally beyond comprehension. People cannot picture that amount of money. But, you know, just break it down. $1 trillion to boost the world economy. What that means is basically some of the money is being given in foreign aid, and not, thought out, measured foreign aid in response to remediable, identified problems. Foreign aid for its own sake, to show that we're doing something, which was brilliantly characterized once as an expensive way of transferring money from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries. Then the rest of it is going to the same big financial institutions on whose watch all of this happened. Now, I've just got to go back and say, why is anyone going to be better off if it's the IMF or the World Bank, or indeed the national regulators, spending money and deciding how to do it, rather than the individual, if you like, with his own mini-stimulus package, i.e. in his wallet, going out and stimulating the economy because he's got that money, because he hasn't had it confiscated from him in tax. If we genuinely think that spending by national or international bureaucracies is more efficient than letting people make their own decisions, if we genuinely think that bureaucracies know what to do with our money better than we do, we have utterly failed to learn the lesson of what happened in Eastern Europe between the Second World War and 1989.
Mr. Hannan, we're out of time. I know you've probably had a crazy week, so thank you very much for coming in to speak with us.
Thanks for having me on.